We are at the Horn Farm Center in York. This is day one of our foraging course with John Darby.
So a little bit about my background and where I'm from. So I grew up here in New York in Red Lion and spent my youth playing on the banks of the Susquehanna. This is one of my favorite creeks down there, the back end of Fishing Creek, and that probably won't help me because I think the Susquehanna has like 15 different creeks called Fishing Creek. So I kind of was a city kid, a towny kid in Red Lion. But I spent a lot of my summers on my grandfather's farm playing at his place. And then a lot of times we would go down to the river and play, which I thought was a pretty amazing place. And it always seemed so far away when I was a kid. And it's really like 5 minutes down the road. So my farm's called Sterling Farm, named after my grandfather, who, I sort of got exposed to farming first as a kid. Played on his farm, rode on the tractor with him. And named my farm after him. His name was Sterling Eady. He was a lifelong York County farmer. That's actually his signature that I swiped off an old hunting license. And a friend of mine worked into the logo, which is pretty cool. And this quote for me sort of defines my farming mentality. I have a lot of mixed feelings on farming for a lot of reasons, but incredible really that we've come to think a local foods movement based in some people farming and many people not at all is a proper substitute for a nation of gardeners. To depend upon markets for one's most essential needs is a brittle situation at best. Farming has never and will likely never replace the resilience and health aspects of most people growing a lot of their own food. As has been said before, we can't depend upon farmers to grow our food for us. A simple but profound statement. We can't depend upon others to do our living for us, to meet our basic needs for us. The small farming movement is just a bridge to what we really need. Not a million new farmers, but only but a billion new gardeners. And to me, that's sort of been my main goal here at this education center is that I want to see enough people growing their own food that I don't have to do it anymore. So I'm really trying to work myself out of a job. Again, framing I think is really important. And another framework that I kind of see my farming through and I see foraging through is permaculture. And I know there's a number of people in this room who have been through permaculture courses. How many, is this a new word to anybody? Sort of. Would anyone like to take a stab at defining this word for Travis and everyone? Our needs, but meet the needs of the ecosystems we're part of and live, and strengthening those. So the key words there that I've enlarged is that it's a design science. So there's a major element of design involved, and that we're using ecology as a model. So we're taking basically things that we can learn from ecosystems and put them into use in our own way. So come on, grab a chair. I think everyone, this is Deb. Like I said, the main keywords there are that's the design science and that we're using ecology as a model. And so it's, like I said, it's based on a set of patterns and principles and also a set of ethics. So in the center there, we have three ethics: earth care, people care, and fair share. And that's sort of the guiding ethics for the whole design system. So earth care is obviously like environmental stewardship and really protecting the land bases in which we live and keeping that primary. People care is taking care of not only each other but ourselves and supporting, like community bases and really keeping that at the forefront as well and measuring all your designs against that as well. And then also fair share, which is, a lot of times that third one gets called a different thing. Ben has started calling it future share. And it's really just keeping redistribution of excess and making sure that there's enough for everyone. And even in, foraging, we look at leaving enough behind for the plants themselves to repopulate themselves, but also for wildlife and other forages that come after you that may need to rely on this food source as well. So we're really trying to be evenly distributed with things we do. Emphasis of sort of their understanding of indigenous growing practices and lifeways, a synthesis of that and sort of modern ecological understanding. And these principles basically represent generalizations about patterns that have been identified in healthy living systems and what makes an ecosystem work and what keeps it whole. And it really is an emphasis on systems thinking. And I've often described it as like the study of relationships. So we're basically looking at all the elements of the system, looking at how they work together, finding disconnection, trying to design to repair that disconnection, and then also understanding that every system is but a subsect of a larger system. Without them, the system collapses. So, trying to think of an example of that. The buffaloes in the Great Plains were a keystone species, I think. Their entire like herding and the way their hooves attached to the soil, and they opened up gashes in the ground to let wildflower seeds in and perennial grain seeds to come in. They basically kept the grasslands fertile by, when you have thousands of buffalo wandering around defecating constantly, you're putting a lot of fertility back in the soil. And the ultimate result of removing them from that system was the Dust Bowl. The farming practices back then had a huge effect on that, but even before that, those systems were so totally degraded from the lack of buffalo that's, I think, the bigger thing that made the Dust Bowl possible. So it's sort of like this collision of bad things. You have the lack of buffalo, you have the non-ecological farming practices that were taking place. And so humans themselves, like we kind of, our actions kind of shape the health and progress of almost every ecosystem on Earth at this point because of, our lifestyle. And so if we can kind of acknowledge our role as a keystone species and sort of take back that interaction with the ecosystems in a more positive way, I think we can actually heal broken systems. Again, with this idea of design. So we always talk about footprint and trying to lower your footprint. And I think permaculture, we need to have small footprints and large handprints. So we need to actually shape some things for the better, for a change. So what is foraging? This is sort of the obvious thing. It's obtaining fuel, fiber, food, and other provisions from the wild. As Dave Jackie says, food, fuel, fiber, fodder, pharmaceuticals, and fun. Your 6 Fs. We also call it wild harvesting, wild crafting. And again, that's a big paragraph there, but basically we have come from a long lineage of opportunistic foragers, and for millions of years, with the natural diet and foraging strategies of hominids resembled those of their primate ancestor. Larger brains improved the odds of their survival, but to secure food, hominids relied on their muscles and simple stratagems as scavengers, gatherers, hunters, and fishers, helped by stone implements, bows, arrows, and by fibrous or leather lines and nets. And I love that they included scavengers in there because foraging for me, another reason I really like foraging is that I've been sort of food obsessed since I was a kid, which isn't necessarily a healthy thing to be. But I've always loved scavenging for food and really looking at sort of marginal food sources, things that we don't consider food. For example, roadkill groundhog that Donna feasted on. I've been dumpster diving. I have friends who dumpster dive regularly. We throw away so much food in this culture and waste so much food. Food consumption in the world, like the 2 largest food consuming countries in the world, the third one is actually just waste. So it's like, that's always bothered me. And so I like to use every little bit of something that I'm using. Scraps go in, even scraps of wild foods I bring home, they go in a bag to be made into like stock. But I have no qualms with scavenging roadkill or trash or other things, if it's fresh and edible and good. So So why forage? And I'm going to tell you my top 3 reasons why I forage and why it's important to me. They're not the only 3 reasons, and that's my farm employee Tyler. They're digging dandelion root up for my CSA last year. I did a wild edible CSA. So number one, nutrition and health, and basically by and large, wild foods are going to outstrip cultivated foods by a huge margin with health and nutrients and things like that. I'm an organic farmer. I grow what I think is pretty good food, pretty healthy, solid stuff, and it will never ever compete with wild foods on a nutritional level. And Arthur Haynes is another forager. I'm going to let him explain that because he does a way better job than I do. Sweat. And you can bring home free stuff like this, which also some of it ends up on my market stand, but that's pretty good stuff to bring home for free. This is a tour around my farm last July. So again, that looks like a pretty awesome cornucopia of foods and herbs and medicines, and all of it free. All of that was harvested in one sort of 1 hour wander around the property here. So starting in the top left corner, there is staghorn sumac. The next little box, we have red clover blossoms, yarrow, marshmallow. Then we have Canada thistle. Like I said, I put that in teas, along with some lemon balm in there. Burdock root. We got the wineberries, and then we have mullein buds and leaves on the bottom here, and then dandelion greens and plantain in that box there. So I do make it a point to take that stuff home in addition to farm veggies. And getting to hang out in places that are just lush and green, and it's very meditative to sort of spend time harvesting and picking through a lot of briars and brush to get a certain thing. And sometimes foraging isn't always the most efficient way of getting food because you can work for a long time. It takes a long time to pick berries, and sometimes picking individual leaves of certain things can take a while, but it's very therapeutic in nature. Not just in my opinion, but that's been scientifically proven that being outside and being in dirt and soil and can actually reduce stress and make you more healthy. Farmer, and prior to that, a gardener. Sort of the ecology behind what we call weeds is really important. To me. Like I said, prior to working at Goldfin Farm, I had really been into like wilderness skills and starting to learn some edible plants here and there. And then I took this job on this farm where I spent literally hours just weeding and pulling out plants that I knew were edible and medicinal. And it seemed kind of counterproductive. Like, I understand that people want tomatoes, but I'm ripping out something that we didn't work for and is actually healthier than a tomato and free. And so when I ended up on my own farm, it became even more important to me. Farming is really hard work. Working 14 hours a day is not unusual during the heat of the summer. And so I don't want to be spending time on things that I don't need to be spending time on. So rather than, again, framing is really important. If we look at this patch of things that we didn't grow and we think, I'm framing that as weeds, then I'm going to treat it one way and I'm going to handle it one way. But if I look at that and instead of seeing weeds, I see individual plants that have their own stories, like, I'm going to treat that very differently. And I can make more informed decisions about which of them I need to remove for the benefit of my vegetables I'm growing, and which of them might actually be helping the vegetables, and which of them really neither help nor hurt, but are just there. And you can actually, it helps me be more efficient as a farmer because I don't have to weed everything out of there. I can leave a lot of it there because A, it's going to provide shade buffer for my plants or keep the ground moist, pull nutrients out of it. Or they're edible medicinal and I can harvest them to eat or sell. So the story behind the weeds themselves became kind of critical to me, and I kind of got more into that stuff. So, what is a weed? Anybody want to give me their definition of what a weed is? Yeah, there's all these very common plants that most people consider weeds, like these four here, and dozens of other we can name. You know, these all grow plentifully on the farm. But what is a weed? So this whole idea, like that answer of this is a plant we didn't plant or a plant we don't want there, like wasn't enough for me. Like I wanted to take that a little deeper, so I wrote my own definition of what a weed is, and I sort of did it through the lens of permaculture. And so to me, a weed is any plant that inhibits the desired function of an area. So that that says something a little different, and really puts the focus on the area itself rather than the plant. So if I'm growing tomatoes and I have a ton of lamb's quarter coming up in there, then maybe that's a weed. If I'm growing onions and I have volunteer tomatoes come up in there, maybe now the tomato's a weed. But we have to look at the area itself and decide what we're trying to do there. And then the second question we have to ask is, how will this plant affect my goal? So again, we're asking better questions than before. So these plants that we call weeds that keep coming back, that we keep having to pull or till or whatever we're doing to maintain that ground, or mow by cover and smothering them with grass seed that doesn't belong there. These plants are serving many different functions. They're holding the soil and preventing erosion. They're replenishing organic matter in the soil. And they feed and restore soil life. A lot of these weedy plants get they produce a lot of biomass, and so all that is eventually going to die, enter the soil again, and feed the microorganisms in the soil.
And the fungi.
The fungi, absolutely. They absorb, conserve, and recycle soluble nutrients that would otherwise leach away. So, a lot of the things that are coming up right now, these spring ephemerals, right before these big spring rains hit, these spring ephemerals are growing, and they're pulling in nutrients into their body and preventing that stuff from leaching away in all the spring rain. And as soon as spring ends, a lot of these plants die back and return that to the soil. So they're sort of like these nutrient dams that just hold the place for the later season plants. They absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere so that they can feed it in a different form to the fungi that we all just referred to. That's a huge function. They restore biodiversity, both because of their own existence, but also because of the diverse life forms that are attracted to them, different animals and insects, habitat for insects, animals. So they're all doing these really important things. So the thing that we call weeds is really a healing process that's trying to repair these systems. So the most ethical thing to harvest from a species level are abundant non-natives. Next we have abundant natives. Then semi-common non-natives, semi-common natives. Rare threatened non-natives, and then rare threatened natives, which are the least ethical. And I can tell you as a farmer, it's super satisfying to come home and everything on the table is stuff I grew. It's actually more satisfying to walk out in the woods or some scraps areas and come back with dinner. Or even more satisfying for that is to send my kids out to my field and say, go get weeds, we need salad tonight. And they come back with like a dozen different wild edibles. So you got kids, teach them now.